from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello, and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Patrick. Patrick, thank you very much for joining me today on the show. The way, as I was telling you, I like my guests to introduce themselves because no one can introduce himself better than himself. So it's all to you.
Well, thank you. Good to see you, Mehmet. My name is Patrick Donadio. I'm a business communications strategist, and I've been out there helping leaders and their teams communicate more effectively for over 2 decades. So I really enjoy leading, and I love helping leaders. And I've been on national boards, and I've worked with CEOs and CFOs. I work with frontline leaders. So I'm so excited today to be on your show to help your listeners learn about how to be more effective communicators. You know, we spend about 80% of our waking day in some form of communications. So it's a skill, that you can't escape. So I'm excited to be here today, and I'm just waiting for you to open up our dialogue and let's give your listeners some great value.
Thank you very much, Patrick, again for being on the show. Let's start, from the logo, which is looking on, I think, it's the right side of the screen, and it's from your book Impact. So, preparing for the show, and I was telling you, communication is something that personally I'm interested in because I think, as you said, like we spend a lot of time communicating with others, maybe not verbally, but maybe over an email, in different forms and shapes. So, if you can explain to us, the 6-step impact to improve communication and how to achieve greater results.
Be happy to. I came up with the process over a period of time. Initially, I was teaching communication skills, and then I had a chance to go to Japan as a Goodwill ambassador. And while I was in Japan, I was visiting the Nissan automotive factory, and I saw up on the wall this big sign that said Kaizen. And the Japanese word Kaizen means continuous learning. And I was talking with some of the people at this automotive factory, and they were talking about the whole importance of having systems to help things be more consistent. So when I came back to the States, I thought, instead of just teaching communication skills, what if I came up with a process that could help people be more effective? And over time, I came up with this acronym called IMPACT. And I know a lot of people think acronyms are kind of, they make up a word to fit, but this really is something I spent a lot of time on. So let me share with you the 6 steps in the IMPACT process. They don't have to be done in order, but I put them in the order that I think is most helpful, but you can do them in any order. And the nice thing about having an acronym is that you can't forget the process because you just have to remember the word impact. So the
Right.
I is the first step of the process, and that's called the intention. And every communication starts with a thought, right? Think before you speak. Yeah, I don't know about you. I've met some folks that start talking before they start thinking, and then they get themselves in trouble or they spend way too much time having a conversation or mistakes are made. So step number 1 is the intention. And again, we can go deeper in any step if you like. I want to just introduce it right now. Once you know the intention, then the M step is the message and the method. So, for example, our intention today is to share this process with your listeners to help them be more effective communicators, be better leaders and business owners, right? That's my intention. So now what would I want to talk about to achieve that intention? And what's the best method? So we're going to talk about method because some methods are better than others, right? Sometimes an email is a good thing. Sometimes a phone call, sometimes a virtual communication like today. So think about the method. And then also what's the message, right? What are the key components that I want to be able to share that's going to help me achieve the intention? So you start to see that everything comes back to the intention, right? Start with the end in mind. The P is the person. So I have an idea of what I'm trying to achieve with the intention. I know what I want to say. I picked the right method. Now I got to think about the right person. And, we're all different, Mehmet. I don't know about you, but, I'm a little extroverted and sometimes a little more analytical. some people a little more introverted, and you just can't assume that we're all the same. So if you're going to communicate to somebody, I think it's important to personalize the message. That's the P step. So the IMP on the process is what I call the planning phase. IMP, I am planning, right? And you're thinking about planning the message. The whole process is being proactive. The ACT is also planning, but now we're thinking about planning the delivery. And the
Mm-hmm.
A is activate. And been a lot of studies done recently, and maybe you've seen the Gallup studies on engagement. So how do you get the receiver engaged physically, mentally, and emotionally? And how do you stay engaged? So we talk a lot about listening skills as well. And that's a skill set that I find a lot of people haven't had a lot of training on. So the A step is active engagement, active listening. The C is clarify. And so we want to think about how do you make sure the message you sent is the exact same message that they receive? Because so many times there's miscommunication, there's misunderstanding, and there's something I like to talk about called selective perception, where the meaning
Mm-hmm.
of the message doesn't come from the sender, but it comes from the receiver. And then the last step, and then what I'd love to talk more about any of these steps with you, is the T step. And the T is how do you transform this communication into the intention we set? Because there are folks that have a lot of conversations, but nothing gets done. So you want to make sure that you have a transformation. And I like to talk about two types of transformations. There's an external transformation that people mostly probably think about, having a deadline and a time frame and maybe an action plan or a written follow up. But then there's the internal transformation, which is what's going to have to change internally inside you or inside the receiver in order to get the results we wanted to achieve. So that's the active process, the impact process, the 6 steps. And what I tell people is if you understand these 6 components, if you just spend a little bit of time before you actually jump on the phone or start typing an email or getting in front of a group or even being on a podcast, to take a moment and think about these steps, you're going to be a much more effective communicator.
That's great, Patrick, and thank you for the explanation. Now, actually, I'm interested in each one of these, and I like when you said put the end in mind. Now, why do you think, Patrick, a lot of people they don't do this, and how they can enhance it?
Well, Mehmet, you know what? We're all impatient. We're busy. We're in a hurry, right? And I think
Right.
it's even getting worse. There's so many things coming at us. For example, my grandparents came from Italy and my parents didn't go to college and my dad never wore a watch. I don't know how he went through his life without a watch, because I have everything I'm doing is always timed. So I think part of the challenge of this is that we want to hurry up and get things done. But I really think in this process, once you kind of understand it and digest it, it literally takes like 60 seconds to 90 seconds to think it through. So it doesn't take a lot of time. And I always try to remind people, and this is an internal transformation, Mehmet, is you have to think about, sure, I can get it done quickly, but how many more times will I have to do it if I don't spend the time up front? So it's like making an investment. If you spend a few moments up front thinking about the communication, thinking about the 6 steps, you're going to find that, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more time, but in the long run, it's going to take less time. So we got to think more long term than short term. So that's my answer to that question. And feel free to dig a little deeper, or maybe even add some of your own thoughts about why people may not take the time to do this.
Yes, exactly. Now, I think one of the key problems, two things come to the mind. First one is maybe because of maybe they are working in a startup and they want to finish everything fast. Maybe because especially I know from myself, if you are working, for example, in a very fast paced job like technology, and you need to be fast, and everyone expects from you, to be very fast responding. Um, so these two things that comes to my mind, plus maybe the culture of the workspace also sometimes. And it's not only related to work. Like some people, unfortunately, in schools, they train us that the faster is better always.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now I believe maybe from your experience, Patrick, maybe some prioritization should be also applied. So because maybe you have multiple messages that you need to send to different people, and it's not, I'm not talking about emails only, like could be email,
Right.
as you said, phone calls. So how important is to make some priorities so you don't rush and you do the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's really, really important is to be proactive. I've loved that term, being proactive. And so here's what that means. Let's say you have a busy day and you have back to back phone calls or back to back meetings. You want
Hmm.
to build in a 5-minute cushion. So you have a few moments between meetings to take a breath and say, okay, now here's my next meeting. What's my intention for this meeting? Right? What are the topics I want to talk about? Who's in the meeting that I need to be thinking about? You know, how am I going to make sure that I'm listening and staying present? Because I got a lot I want to talk about. And how am I going to make sure that I'm being clear and I'm going to check for understanding? And of course, when we wrap up the meeting, do I have a closing that's going to help me move this forward and achieve some of our intentions? So you see what I just did? Literally, that was less than 30 seconds. So it doesn't take a lot of time. And that's why I love the process, because now it gives you something concrete to think through, as opposed to, "Oh, okay, I'm done with that meeting. What am I going to do in the next meeting? I don't know. I'll do something, I guess. I just want to take a, you don't like, without any guidance. There's a book I read years ago. If you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up someplace else. It's so I tell our listeners, plan a cushion between your meetings if you have back to back meetings, even if you can only get 5 minutes. So don't say the meeting's from 10 to 11, say it's from 10 to 10:55. So you have that
Hmm.
cushion. Number two is you could, your business probably, you could take some time and plan out your message for your business. And a lot of those components will be things you'll use in every conversation, right? Like, what are the
Right.
benefits of my product or service? That's part of your message. You should know all that information. So I would suggest, in addition to having a cushion between meetings, I hope all our listeners, if you are a leader, if you run a business, you need to have every week some time for you. You need to put on your calendar an hour, 45 minutes of planning time for you, where you have some time to sit down and think about the week coming up or think about the week you just had. And one of the transformation steps that I talk about in the book is the WD. So in this planning time, you're going to think about what you've done and you're going to ask yourself two questions. What did I do well this past week? And what will I do differently next week? Right. And
Hmm.
automatically, I'm going to be getting better. And so, A, have some time between communications, and B, have some planning time on your calendar every week for you. And make sure you don't push it, because it's easy to push it when something else comes up. You can move it. If you don't do it Thursday, do it on Friday, but don't go the whole week without having any planning time. So those are a couple quick thoughts I hope maybe the listeners might like.
Yeah, that's great. And one more advice from my side that I started to do and it helped me a lot. Maybe not related. You would tell me, Patrick, but what I started to do is if I'm getting a meeting request, I'm asking, I need a detailed agenda and I need to know what we are talking and why we are doing this meeting. And maybe it's a technical advice. And when now I put my calendar on autopilot, so I don't need to tell people, okay, let's have a call or whatever, a meeting at 11. Go book it from there, and I make it automatically to leave this gap you mentioned. So I make
Yes.
sure like it's a 50 minutes, and then I have between two meetings minimum 10 minutes. So
Yes.
I'm not in a hurry and acting as you were saying, because I was doing the same mistake before, like a couple of years back. Like, yeah, let's do back-to-back meetings. And people think that the more meetings you do, the more productive you are. But
Right.
you figure out that at the end of the day, that you talk to a lot of people and you don't remember anything from what you met did
Yeah.
that day.
Yeah.
So 100%. Now let's move to the next one, because I'm interested also to understand about the message management,
Yes.
and the method. Like, this
Yeah.
is very, very important, because, people, I think they rush, for example, oh, let's send an email. Oh, let's
Yep.
have a call,
Yep.
So I want to hear that from you also, Pat.
Yeah. So you're right. So the first step is the intention. And basically, I just want people to take 60 seconds and ask yourself, why am I having this conversation? Right? What's the importance of this particular communication? And once you get that clear, concise intention, then you say, now what's the best way to communicate this? So again, the message management is the M step. You have the method and you have the message. So let's take the method first. So many
Hmm.
people, Mamet, they tend to use their favorite method, right? And I always remind us, it's not about you, it's about the receiver. So, like, for example, I'd rather have a phone call. I'd rather do a phone call than texting, or a phone call than email. So I'm going to make a phone call. Well, guess what? Sometimes that's not the right method. I'll give you a quick example. I have grown adult children, and I learned a long time ago, if I ever try to call, I'm going to get voicemail, and they're probably not going to call me back because that's not their preferred method. So I know as much as I don't like it, I have to text. That's the way to start the conversation. So when you're thinking about the intention and you're thinking about the message, what's the method? Is it better to start with a text or start with a phone call or start with an email? Or is
Mm-hmm.
it better to start with, another format? But here's the homework assignment for all of our listeners. What's your preferred method? And then make sure that you don't go there. Like, Mehmet, what's your preferred method? If you had to pick a method, what do you like the best?
If someone want to reach to me,
Yeah, yeah.
I prefer email, for example,
Okay. Yeah,
or a text.
yeah. So if you're a team leader right now, or you have a company, one thing I would encourage you to do is find out from your executive team or from from your team leaders what's their preferred method, and then communicate that way. So I know now, Mehmet, if I want to reach out to you, it's best to send an email first. Now, maybe I want to do a phone call because, for example, if we're going to talk about a very complex issue, email is not the best method. But
Right.
it's a good method to start. So I know I need to get you to a phone call, but I'm not going to call you. I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to say, Mehmet, how are you doing? Have you got 10 minutes? I want to discuss Project X so we can make sure we move forward with ABC. And then I'm going to move you to the method that's most appropriate. But you want to start with the method that the receiver prefers. That way you can get them to respond. Does that make sense?
100%. Yes.
So know the preferred receiver of your teammates and know your own preference. So, for example, Mehmet, I'm not sure if this is true, but my guess is your first thought is I'm going to send an email because that's what you like. We just
Yes.
go to our default method, but you might want to say, well, I like an email, but this is John. And you know what? He never responds to emails. I better send a text. So then you do what you don't like to get it started. And then you can, move it over to the right approach. So that's a little bit about the method. There's a lot of methods. Think about the intention. What's the best method to achieve the intention? And what's the best method for that person that's going to start the conversation?
Yeah, that's amazing. Like it's spot on. And like sometimes I would be frank, like I would try to guess.
Yeah.
I would try to give it a guess. Like maybe this guy would like a text, maybe
Right.
he would like, a phone call. But yeah, it's trial and error. Especially like, if I'm trying to reach someone who, you know, maybe we met one time or two times. So I'm not
Yes.
very
Yes.
sure. Right.
Yeah.
And this is where I think doing the personalization of the message is important, right?
Yeah.
So I know when I was preparing, you talk about 4 personality styles. So what can you tell us about this?
Yeah. Well, let me just quickly jump back to the message part. We talked about the method real quickly. So once you know the method, then think about the message. And so the message is basically what are the key components that I want to cover in this conversation as it relates to the intention?
Hmm.
So when you want to create content, one of the things you want to do is make sure you just don't jump in. Have a little plan. Take a few moments, think about the message. What's the opening? What's the closing? Every good communication has an opening and a closing. There's an opening in an email. There's an opening in a phone call. There's an opening in a presentation, right? And there's a
Yeah.
closing. So the message structure, opening, body, closing, and what some of the key components are is an important part. I wanted to make sure we wrap that up. But let's jump over the persons, right? Personality styles. We're all different, right? I don't know about you, but I know I have my wife and my 2 children, and they're all different. My kids are not exactly the same. One's more of an
Right.
extrovert, one's more of an analytical. And I saw this very early on. Just a quick example when my son was young. I remember one time I said, "Hey, get inside the car." He said, "Dad, it's a minivan." I said, "Okay, get inside the vehicle." You know what I mean? So right away you can see he's very analytical. You got to be precise. You can't just make stuff up. So the P step is to take a moment and think about what's your own personality style? What's your own
Hmm.
experience? What's your own education level? What's your own background? What's your own culture? And then what's the personality style, educational level, background, culture of the receiver? And then you want to blend these two together, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm talking with an introvert and I'm an extrovert, I know that I got to be careful not to dominate the conversation because I could do that very easily. So I got to go in. I've got to get the awareness, right? I'm an extrovert. Ask more questions. Be more patient. Don't interrupt. And vice versa. If you're an introvert and you're talking with an extrovert, you got to go into the conversation saying, Okay, be a little more assertive, come prepared with questions, anticipate what might be, some of the questions, because you know what? Introverts like to think before they speak. Extroverts like to speak before they think. So there's a definite difference. So those are just a few ideas, but it's so important not to make the assumption we're all the same. I'm going to call Mary. I'm going to call John. I'll just do the same thing for both. That's not going to work always.
Wow, that's yeah. Like I'm trying to remember some cases where I had to do this. Um, but just out of curiosity, like, is this something that stays the same, Patrick, or it can change over time? I mean,
That's a great question. From the research that I've seen, when it comes to personality styles, most personalities are not really formed until, like a young adult level, like, 17, 18, 19. So if you
mhm,
have children, then you might see that changing. And for the most part, your style is going to stay the same unless you have some kind of a significant emotional experience.
mm,
So, a death of a loved one, a divorce, God forbid, maybe a traumatic experience where you had, you got fired or something like that. So when there's something like that, then you might see some kind of a shift, in personalities. So yeah, I mean, it can change over time. It's not just going to all of a sudden change overnight, but it could change, and it's going to be dependent on what I call these significant emotional experiences. Does that make sense?
100%,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, because I've seen some people, yeah, like they changed, and yeah, it was like after a major event,
Yeah.
um, went from extrovert to introvert.
Yeah. One
Um,
other quick thing. Sorry to interrupt you. I just before I
no
forget,
worries.
you actually have what I call a natural style and an adapted style. So when I work with my coaching clients, I use DISC. There's a lot of different, there's Myers Briggs and there's Herman Dominance, but I use the DISC process. And when I do a DISC report, if I did the DISC report on you, Mehmet, it would give me a 22-page report about you. And
Mm,
there's gonna be 2 graphs, a natural graph and an adapted graph. So you act a certain way at home and you act a certain way at work. Sometimes people are the same in both places, sometimes they're different. So I wanna make sure when you ask the question, in general, over time, you probably won't change that often, but you might be different at home, at work, depending on the job. So does that make
right,
sense?
100%. And
Yeah.
uh, I'm not sure. Maybe some people they can do these two roles in very good way. I'm not good at it at all. And but I can tell you this is was part of my success. I mean, in communication with people, um, because I knew about it because I was asked, like, are you always like this? You know, because people get some stereotypes sometimes. Okay, if he's working in tech and he's in this position, so he must be like this. And when they start to talk to me, and yeah, I've been asked multiple times, are you always like this style of communication? I say, yeah, like, it's been the case for this is how I know myself. Now, you mentioned something, Patrick, when you were explaining about listening.
Yes.
And I think, this is, I want you to elaborate more on that, especially, I see this in multiple domains. In entrepreneurs, they get some ideas and they like to explain about what they are up to, and speak, or talk. And I see it, for example, on some people who work in sales, and I see it on some people who, you know, so they are excited. I cannot blame them, but why listening and active listening is very
Yeah. Well, you're right on target. And Mehmet, I've been doing workshops and seminars for over 2 decades. And many times I'll ask when I'm doing this particular workshop on communicating with impact, I'll ask the audience, how many of you have had a formal listening skills workshop, 60, 90-minute workshop? And guess what percentage of the audience raises their hand? Any idea?
very few, I would say.
Less than 15%. So,
Hmm.
first of all, the reason we're not good listeners is because we haven't had the skill set training. Universities and high schools, they don't really spend the time teaching this subject. There are classes there, but a lot of people don't take a listening skills class. So, one challenge is we don't learn this process. The second challenge is that there is a definite gap between how fast people think and how fast people speak. And so I
Mm-hmm.
call this the genetic attention prohibitor or the gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so on average, we can think 3 times faster than someone can speak. So
Mm-hmm.
while you're talking to me, you're talking, you're going beep, and my brain's going beep, 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 right? So I'm always working faster. So I have to be aware that there is this natural challenge. So I have to slow down. I got to stay present, right? And that's why it's called active listening. Listening and hearing are 2 different things. Anybody
Right.
can hear. You can hear. Let's be quiet for 1 second, and you're going to hear a little feedback noise in the background. You hear the hum. I got mine on my computer's humming a little bit.
Yeah, I can.
But listening is where you are intentionally paying attention. So,
Mm-hmm.
for people that are listening right now, I want to just remind you, if you haven't had any listening skills training, I highly recommend you go online, find some information to learn about listening, get some great tips, and also remind yourself it's naturally a challenge. Now, you couple that, Mehmet, with a personality style, and then it's even more challenging, right? Because extroverts have a hard time listening. They want to be in charge. They want to talk. And I've learned, and I'm an extrovert, but I do a lot of coaching, and I've learned really the important skill of being a better listener. And it's not easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to make the transition because I remind myself, right? What's my intention? Well, my intention right now is to be a coach, right? Let's go back to the impact process. My intention is to be a coach, which means
Yeah.
I be asking more questions and talking less because that's my role as a coach. Now, when I'm in front of an audience, obviously, my intention is to deliver information. So I may still ask questions, but I'm probably going to talk a lot more. So active listening is an important component. I hope that gives you a couple insights, and we can, talk a little bit more about the topic if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Like, because I was reading, I'm not sure if I saw it on LinkedIn or somewhere else, and someone was saying that the problem is in schools, they teach us to, being asked questions instead of, like, so it's about like, we were trained also to not listen. So we are always asked to talk, actually. So, and yeah, like I would love to dig a little bit more with you, Patrick, on that, and
Yeah.
why again, this is part of not only the process, but it's a better way for success as well.
Yes. Yes. So I would say, first of all, if you're a leader, as you move, this is my opinion, Mehmet, you can share what you think. As you move up in an organization, every time you go up to another level, people think you need to be talking more. I actually think you need to be listening more. As you go up the level as a leader, your job is not to necessarily have all the answers sometimes. So asking good questions, paying attention, listening. I had a CFO that I was coaching who moved actually from CFO to CEO. And the first
Mm-hmm.
thing that she did is she went on a listening tour. When she got into the new role, she said, for the next 90 days, I'm just going to go on a listening tour. I want to go around. I want to hear what people are thinking. I want to know what what your concerns are. And so she had these town hall meetings where she just, made a few statements and then just opened up for questions. And she was listening, 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 because she understood something that I learned um, from my wife, who's a physician. Diagnose before you prescribe.
Mm-hmm.
Diagnose before you prescribe. Well, you can't diagnose correctly if you're not listening and asking good questions. So, in terms of being an active listener, you also have to be a good person with questions. So, I'm going to give our listeners a homework assignment. I'd like you to start to create your list of your top 10 questions, right? Because you can't be a good listener unless you know how to ask good questions. So start to think about what are some of your best questions you can use. You've got questions to get people to think. You have questions to come up with solutions. You have questions to engage people in a conversation. You have questions for clarification. You have questions for empowerment, right? So you don't have to have the answers many times if you just ask a good question.
Right. Right. Like it's very much resonating with me now. Um, by the way, like one of the things that I had to train myself when I decided to do this podcast is how I can ask better questions and how I can, listen carefully to my guest. So based on that, I can come up with a more interesting question. Um, and sometimes people ask me like, do you try like to look like you are the smart guy, listening and asking the tough question. And I say, no, I like, to listen first to get myself the information. And then later on, I can, in a couple of seconds, I can build the next, how I want to take my conversation back. And I think this is very important, because you need to listen so you can ask the question as well.
Yes.
And I can relate this, Patrick, even like in the consulting field, because I work as a technology consultant for a long time and I still do it. So, and I tell everyone, guys, don't go to the customer and start to talk about, what you have. Go
Right.
sit down, you know, let the customer talk and be active listeners, because this is how you can really later on the turn will come to you. Don't worry, like you will have your turn at some
Right.
stage, but listen first and then you can you know start to tell them about what they should do, which direction they should go, and all this stuff. So 100% on this.
Yeah.
Now I know maybe I'm jumping on the things, but when you are explaining the process, you ended it with the T, which is transform, which transform, I get it, but it's like a big word also as well.
Yes.
So I want to understand, like how it's, and by the way, it's related to the intention, which is you start with in the impact. So tell me more about this transformation in this process.
Yeah. Well, Mehmet, even though it's the last step in the process, it's really not done at the end. It's actually done throughout the entire process, right?
Mhm.
For example, once I get clear on my intention, that transforms my whole conversation, right? So every
Right.
step actually is a transformation if you think about it. Because, for example, if I didn't know our topic today was about my book on communicating with impact, I might be talking about, all kind of things. Maybe I've seen people on shows, and it's okay. I'm not saying this is not a good thing, but maybe they talk about their whole life story. And, that's
Yeah.
nice, but that's not necessarily the intention. So the intention transforms everything. If you, for example, pick the right method, you can transform the response you're going to get. So transformation is the act of, movement, of clarity, of kind of pushing towards results, and it happens throughout the process. And of course, it happens at the end because at the end, everything goes back to the intention, right? So if my goal was to have a meeting with this client, let's talk about sales for just a moment because it's a very important part of being a business owner. And so many
Sure.
people get excited about, I want to have a restaurant. Yeah, well, that's great, but if nobody comes and buys the food, you're not going to be in business, right? So in sales, for example, the transformation happens by you asking good questions, and if you get the person to come up with the answer that you wanted them to have, they're more likely to embrace it. That's part of transformation. So even being a good listener is part of transformation. And I love what you said, ask more questions. And in the old days, I've been around a long time. I don't know how long you've been around, but it used to be, you think about sales, it's like talk, 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 sign here, right? To me, the
Yeah.
new process is listen, 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 and then repeat back what you heard. And one of the most important things that I've learned is when you're listening, use their language back to them. If the prospect says, we got some challenges, you don't say, I heard you have some problems. No, you say, I heard you have some challenges. Let me share what I heard. Right. So using the language, by using the right language is a transformation. So, anyways, the transformation step, even though it's at the end, happens throughout the process. And you want to just jump to the T step? I'll talk about internal, external transformations if you like.
Yeah, please. Let's go deep, more deep and more into this.
Yeah. So to me, I just love this concept of transforming because there's so much that happens and there's so little that gets done sometimes. And
Mhm.
that's the thing that and sometimes it's good to be impatient in a way because it does help you move forward. Right. So there are two types of transformations I talk about quite extensively in the book. The one is the what I call the external transformation. So here's the first example of an external transformation. Have a deadline.
Mhm.
For every what, identify a who and ask when. So if you're running a meeting, this is a good tool for you to jot this down. For every what, identify a who and ask when. So because if you don't put a deadline on something, it's going to take a lot longer. So transformation in one way is to have deadlines, right? That's an
Right.
example of an external transformation. Another example of an external transformation, if you do have a meeting, you know what? send out a follow-up report, maybe a little action minutes or something to remind people what we talked about. And then there again, you can use for every what, identify who and ask when, right? So deadlines, follow-up summaries, asking questions is part of a really good transformation. Again, because I mentioned before, if I get you to come up with a solution, you're more likely to embrace it. So those are all examples of the external transformations. I could spend a lot more time there, but I want to jump into the internal transformations. And
Yep.
these are the kind of things that I don't think we always think about. And I'm curious if this is something that you think about quite often. And this is what I call the internal mindset or the beliefs we have. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a coach, I've learned a long time ago our beliefs drive our behaviors drive the results we get. So many times we focus on behaviors, which is good, right? The deadline, minutes, action. But sometimes if we don't see action, then I encourage my clients dig a little deeper and find out what's the belief or the mindset of the person, because that may be what's getting in the way of the transformation. You know what?
Mm-hmm.
So let me stop for a minute. And when I say mindsets or beliefs, tell me a little bit about how do you use that or you think about that at all in your interactions or communications?
Uh, this is a good one. Um, I think we need to understand the other person. Like I never
Yes.
thought about it this way. To be very frank with you,
Yeah.
because I assume that they will have the same mindset as me.
Right.
Or I would be hoping that I am, like strong enough they will have, or I will convince them to have the same mindset as me.
Right.
But I never thought about it this way.
Yeah. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I wanted to just kind of remind
Yeah.
people that I don't think we spend some time here. And you don't have to always spend a lot of time here. But here are some symptoms of when you want to think about the belief of the mindset. When somebody becomes very judgmental or very defensive, there's an
Mm,
example where you might want to say, okay, really going on there? There's something more to this than I'm noticing. Or when people don't necessarily get things done, they don't follow through. And maybe, it could be a skill, it could be an external, but it might be an internal mindset. I do a lot of presentation skills coaching, and I don't know about you, Mamet, but a lot of people are not comfortable making presentations. And so some studies say its biggest fear is the fear of speaking in public. Well, when I work with my clients, a lot of times it's not that they can't get up and speak, it's that they don't want to or they're afraid to. Well, so I could give them all the external skills possible, but the internal process is what's getting in the way. So when it comes to, for example, being a more effective presenter, you want to think about what's going on inside your head, right? I mean, you might have somebody. I've had clients who said to me, "Well, I'm not a good storyteller." Well, first of all, if you say to yourself you're not a good storyteller, guess what? You're not going to be a good storyteller because
you
you've
are
already
denying
created
it.
the narrative. Yeah.
Yes.
So you get the idea. There's a lot of self-talk. There's a lot of beliefs that we grow up with, that we learn from our culture, from our parents, from our teachers, that we've
True.
been programmed. And I always tell a lot of my clients, you wouldn't be working on a DOS computer right now because it's just out of date. But yet some of us have DOS beliefs and mindsets that we haven't upgraded, in years. So the operating system inside our head is what I call the beliefs or the mindsets. And just like you keep updating your software, you need to update your mindset. And so if our listeners are really curious about this, I would encourage them to do a little more reading on mindsets and beliefs, because there's a very important process there that for some of us we just don't think through.
Wow, I love this insight, Patrick. And I will just give some couple of examples if you
Sure.
allow me. So one time I was working on a project, and you know, the client, one of the personnel at the customer or at the company was not responsive, and he was always shying off, or he was pushing back. And then we decided, me and one of my colleagues, like we decided to, okay, let's try to understand why this guy is behaving this way, right? So he's like a little bit defensive, as you were mentioning. He doesn't want to collaborate with us, and we said, okay, let's try to break the ice and see what this guy is really thinking. And we told him, hey, listen, let's go to a lunch outside the building and just have a chat. We promise we'll not talk business and we'll not talk about what we are doing. And he accepted. And then we figured out just in half an hour, and we were looking to each other, me and my colleague, I still remember. Um, he said, after we finished lunch, are you thinking same what I'm thinking? I said, yes. Uh, the guy is not happy at work, and this is why, he's behaving this way. So, and in his mind, if he accepted what we were trying to offer these guys, he was defensive because he might lose his job, or he was feeling insecure. And we
Yes.
just, we needed to convey the message to him that, hey, we're not here to replace you, or we're not here to do something that will harm you. And then things work perfectly. But if we didn't do this step, trying to communicate, we would think, oh, this guy, he doesn't like us, he wants to be our enemy, which is not the case, of course. And the
Yeah.
second thing regarding what you mentioned, and I'm not sure if I was so overconfident at that time, when I was working in a university, and then, it's like a pure introvert job. Like I was a system administrator. Like my job is just to fix computers and servers and so on. And when I got, the same guy actually who hired me and asked me, hey, can you do a presentation for 10 people? I said, yes, of course. Can you do it for 100 people? I said, yes, of course. And I never done it before. I said, can you do it for 500 people? I said, come on. Like, if you can do a presentation the same way I'm talking to you now, I can do it even for 1,000 people. I don't mind. So it's about, like, don't say I cannot do it. Like, this
Yes.
is something 100%. I had to agree with you, Patrick. And this is something I always push people, because unfortunately, sometimes we see a lot of negativity out there. And
Yes.
I'm happy you brought this topic, because one part of what I'm trying to do, although it's called CTO show, we are humans and we need to, keep pushing each other's for the best. And thank you for bringing this topic, Patrick. Really,
Yeah.
I loved, to that you touch base on this 100%.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
No, I was just going to add that I would just say for a lot of us, and I'm included, we all need to spend a little bit more time learning about ourselves and understanding what drives us. And and one of the great things that I've gotten to do over the years, because I did go through coaches training and I have a coach myself, is I was able to understand about why I was doing what I was doing. For example, I grew up in a blue collar family. My grandparents, as I said, came from Italy. My parents didn't have any college education. And so we had this little thing that I learned: you want something, you got to work hard for it. The harder you work,
Mhm.
the greater the reward. And so I always worked hard. I worked really hard. I was a good student. I graduated summa cum laude. I went back to grad school, got an MBA. I got promoted every 2 years, work hard, work hard, work hard. And then when I started my business, Mehmet, my first year, I didn't make hardly any money. I didn't know that how important sales was. And after the first year, when I didn't make a lot of money, what did I say to myself? I got to work harder. And so the next year I worked harder. Well, I didn't make any more money. And then I realized I was at a workshop, and the phrase that pays, and you've probably heard it, it's from the 80s: don't work harder, work smarter. And
Right.
that belief mindset changed my business. I went out, embraced technology. I was an early adopter. I got a computer. I bought some software that helped manage my activities, my CRMs. And in about 2 or 3 years, I tripled my gross only because I was working smarter. Now I say, to be honest, I'm not going to brag, but I work less hours now and I make more money only because I have more experience and because I become really good at systems. So there's an example of a belief mindset that was instilled in me at a very early age. And that was a good mindset when you're trying to raise a child. You want them to work hard, but at some point, a belief we had when we're a teenager or a 20-year-old does not work when you become a business owner and you're 40 or 50. So I hope our
Right.
listeners today heard what you had to say and what we had to say. And I hope to take a little bit of time to go back and think through, what beliefs do you possess that drive your behaviors? And maybe are there some beliefs like the one I just shared that I had to shift from not working harder, but working smarter, that's going to just transform your whole business?
Amazing. Really, I love it. Um, Before I ask you something else, like anything we need still to cover, Patrick, from the process, because we discussed the I and the M and the T, and I think
Yeah.
we covered
Yeah.
the A as well. So
Yeah.
what is left for us there?
Well, we didn't talk about the C for clarify, so I'll just take a minute and
Yes,
just remind people
sure.
that you just can't make assumptions that the message you sent is going to be received the way you intended, right? And it goes back to what we got done talking about, right? We all have different beliefs and mindsets. So when you share something, it's going to be filtered by the receiver. It's called selective perception, right? And if I asked you, for example, to think of a dog, I don't know if you have any pets, but
I have cats.
okay. So, but if I said think of a cat, what color cat are you thinking of?
The color that's the best that I have, ginger one.
Yeah, ginger, right. So I have a gray cat. And so again, when you say the word cat, we both go back to our own experience, and you're thinking of a ginger cat, I'm thinking of a gray cat. That's selective perception. So our
Right.
history, our experiences taint our perception. And so that's why you got to check for understanding. You can't just make an assumption that when I say something, they're going to get it. So in this process, we spend some time talking about, and I hope our listeners will think about this, is make sure that when you're after you communicated or before you wrap up, you find a way to check in and make sure we're both on the same page. Don't just
Mm.
assume that I've done a great job and I know that they know exactly what I want them to do. So selective perception is going to get in the way, and I want to make sure we spend a few minutes to remind people you got to check for understanding, ask some good questions, maybe paraphrase what you heard sometimes, ask for clarification, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So that we've covered all the 6 steps, and we can jump in wherever you want to go as you move forward on the call today.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add here regarding this, Patrick, and like whoever you're talking to, whether a colleague or a customer that you visited, they appreciate that you take the time at the end, whether it's a phone call or an email or whatever, maybe not an email, maybe phone call or in a meeting, when before you leave, you just summarize and you say, okay, this is what we have discussed today. This is what we agreed on. This will be the next step. So it's kind of, like if you put the blueprint of what are the next actions. And if we are all humans, we can make mistakes. And if at some stage maybe you lost them, they would correct you because they
Yes,
would be listening and they say, hey, no, I didn't say this, I said that. Oh,
right.
okay, let me fix that right away. And then you repeat it again. This worked all the time, perfectly to me. And as you said also, like regarding the follow up, I mean, let's say you did a visit again. So once you are back to your home or office or whatever, just send an email and again summarize that one time again because
Right.
this is very important. I'm giving this for founders, for people working in consultancy mainly. Customers, they love it, and actually it's good for you also as well because once you repeat it 2 3 times, like you will get it.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned a bit about the public speaking, and then we touched base. So just out of curiosity, like how you or what you can tell us about keeping audience engaged and making it as much interactive as possible. It's like, of
Yeah.
course, I know we can dig a lot there. Like maybe you can give us some techniques that
Sure.
they might be applied to their presentation, or
Yeah.
maybe even if they are teaching something as well.
Yeah. Love that. And Mehmet, I started out my business as a trainer, and I used to work at a university in higher education. So I taught some classes. And so I've always enjoyed being in front of groups, but I've learned over the last, 2 decades or more, how to really engage an audience because I've probably done, I bet almost 3,000 paid presentations over the last, few decades. So the thing is this though, it's become more and more important to engage people because people just are more impatient, right? You can't get away like you could if let's take you're taking a college class, professor talks to you for 60 minutes and you don't do anything but listen. That's not going to fly. So number
Hmm.
one, people who are listening today, if you're going to make any kind of interaction with groups, I would encourage you, again, once you've worked out the whole meeting, the whole presentation, this is the thing I like to do at the end. I'll walk through and I'll say, now, are there any sections or areas where I feel that I'm doing too much talking or I'm running the meeting and it's going on too long? How can I engage people in the audience? So I will go back and take a look at where I can plant some engagement techniques. And my suggestion is, literally every 3 to 5 minutes, you want to be doing something that's engaging the audience, right? Physically, mentally, or emotionally. So
Hmm.
here's the first thing that I think makes for great engagement is have a really dynamic opening. And don't open up your presentation with, good morning, I'm Patrick Donadio. Today I want to talk about presentation skills. You want to be engaging. You might say, my first paid speech was a disaster. And then you pause and then you tell the story. And then you if you have a workshop, you could open up with a story, right? Instead of good morning, I'm Patrick Donadio. Let's talk. No, so a story is a great engagement tool you can use in a presentation. Short stories, you can use it as an opening. You can use it in the middle of a presentation. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing that I love for openings is just asking a good question, right? And I'm like, and this might not work for you, but I like to just kind of shock them a little bit. I don't want to, do all the things everybody else does. Good morning, hello. I would open up maybe with this. Have you ever found your heart pounding the night before you had to make a big presentation? I have too. And let me tell you. So, see, you pull them in with a question. So, anyways, engagement starts at the beginning of your presentation. Then during your
Mm-hmm.
presentation, and I love this is my fam. I'm so glad you asked this question because we could come back and do a whole show just on presentations because I do
Right.
a workshop on this. It's so much fun. I love doing this. But going back to engagement is that you want to engage people throughout, right? So using, for example, some visuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having a slide. If you're going to use slides, make sure that they're not 9,000 paragraphs, right? Some key phrases, maybe a picture, maybe a reveal sometimes using where you don't have everything pop up at the same time. So visuals is another way to engage people. Another way to engage people is having the audience interact. So again, doesn't work all the time, but I do a lot of workshops, and so many times I'll put people in small groups. I'll say, look, thinking of openings, I'd like you to turn to your neighbor. I'm going to give you about a minute or two. Talk about what are the different types of openings you've seen people use when they make a presentation. Then the audience talks to their neighbor, blah, 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 blah. Hey, let's get back together. So what are some of the different types of opening? Then they tell me. And then I said, these are great. I'll talk about 5, right? So now I've
Mm-hmm.
got them engaged. Now they feel like they are thinking about openings. They're totally focused on openings. So they just got done talking about it. Now they're more receptive to listening to me. So now I can come back and share some of my content as opposed to, what I call show up and throw up. I don't know. That's probably not the right thing to say on your show, but you get people that show up and throw up. They just show up and they just throw up all the stuff and they don't, they don't think about the importance of keeping the audience engaged.
I think this is very important. And I learned it the hard way as well. Um, you need to be creative. You need to, I'm not sure if you would agree with me, Patrick, or no, but sometimes you need to, from the faces of the audience, you say, like these guys, they look very serious. So better I start with this. And
Yes.
sometimes you see the people that are very relaxed and then, you know that immediately you can start with a joke, right? So,
Right.
uh, it worked with me, I can say 90%, 95% of the time. Of course, at some stages, you have serious people that whatever you do, you know, they are like this, but they are like 2 or 3 out of maybe 20 people in the room. So
Right.
so you need to do some assessment. And honestly speaking, when I used to do, but I'm not doing this for quite some time, but when I used to go to these conferences where there are like hundreds of people and you are forced to use PowerPoint, which I'm not a very big fan of. So the way I used to do it is just pick someone and ask him a random question. Like, hey, why are you here today? Or, uh, so far, what was the best presentation you saw during the day? Or, something like this. So at least people, they understand. And, I like to move a lot also as well. So
Yes.
at least, I can see, like people like they will not be playing with their phones. But I agree with you, Patrick. The hook at the beginning is very important. And the best thing I've seen, people who talk, for example, on TED and something like this, when they start with a story and a hooking
Yeah.
story, like not any story. Hey, I'm Mehmet. I'm the
Right.
CTO show podcast host. Who cares, right? So
Yeah.
I need to tell them, hey, did you know, like, I never did a live recording before, for example. Yeah. So 100% agree with you, Patrick, on
Yeah.
this. So I think we've covered quite good topic, and I agree with you. Maybe we need for the public speaking, and presentation another episode. But before we close, Patrick, 2 things very quickly. Where people can find more about you.
Sure. I mean, the easiest way to if you want is just connect with me on LinkedIn and you can see my name on the screen, Patrick Donadio. Just go to LinkedIn, send me an invite, and if you can, let me know you met on the show, that'd be great. Or you can go to my website, which is patrickdonadio.com. And by the way, I have a resources page where people can go. There's some other articles. There's a nice article there on 8 mistakes presenters make. So if you really like this topic, you can go there and get that free
Sure.
article as well. So
Sure.
either on LinkedIn, my website, those are two good places. You can always email me. Everything's simple. It's patrick@patrickdonadio.com. So I try to make
It
life easy,
it will
and
be
they can feel free to reach out.
yeah, it will be in the episode description. So just
Yeah.
for the people, not don't worry if you didn't, be able to catch it. So it will be in the episode description. And I have a very final question, which kind of became a legacy now. Is
Yeah.
there anything, Patrick, that you wish I had asked you and how you would answer?
Yeah. Well, one thing I wish you would have asked me was, what is the best thing our listeners can do right now to start becoming a better communicator?
Yeah,
And
tell us.
I would say this: spend some time every week thinking about what you're doing and who you're doing it with. And if possible, even consider some of the things we shared today, right? Because the best thing we can all do for ourselves is invest in ourselves, which is what I think people are doing right now by listening to your podcast. So I hope, Mehmet, by being with your listeners today, they got a couple good ideas they can put into practice. And I always close every presentation, whether it's a keynote or a workshop, with this favorite quote: "Nothing changes until you change." So I'm so glad you joined us today. But if you leave our podcast and do nothing different, you'll be the same person. So take one or two ideas today, put them into practice. If they don't work the first time, fine tune it, try it again.
Take action. Right,
Yes.
100%. Well, thank you very much, Patrick. I really, feel very, happy that you shared all this knowledge with my audience today, and I'm sure that they will have a lot of takeaways. And I'm sure that we're gonna make another episode in the future again together, as I mentioned. And the way I end my podcast episodes is always I ask all the audience for their feedback. So, guys, you will have all the links that Patrick mentioned. They will be available in the description. But if you have any question or feedback, also please reach out to me. I like to listen to your feedbacks, and tell me what topics you would love me also to discuss on the show. Like, I love to hear from you about it. And if you are interested to be guest also as well, don't be shy. Reach out to me. If you have an inspiring story, you have, something very, very inspiring, similar to what Patrick have done with his book, reach out to me. We can discuss. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Patrick is in the US, I am in Dubai, and I have guests from all around the world. So don't worry about time zones. I can manage it. And thank you for tuning in. And until we meet next time, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button. Share the show with your tech savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs.